Perfect. So my name's Tyler Colburn. Most of you probably know who I am at this point, but I'm the professional development consultant here with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. And the session today is really about the power of mentorship. And we're thinking about mentorship from the context of the Candidacy Mentorship Program, but we're also thinking about mentorship as sort of a value and a way of approaching leadership in community, not just the Candidacy Mentorship Program. I know in this call we have some candidates and some mentors, and I wanted to just take a moment to also introduce Tiffany Taylor and Winnie Grant as well. Throwing you folks on the spot a little bit, but I would love for you folks to be able to introduce yourselves to the people on the call. Maybe Tiffany, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, everyone. My name is Tiffany Taylor. Winnie Grant is my mentor, and she has been mentoring me since, I believe it's been October. I believe so. And yeah, I am currently working, I'll say child protection, but we're trying to change the language. So, child and family well-being with the Department of Opportunities and Social Development.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Winnie.
Okay, folks, my name is Winnie Grant. I have been a mentor, I really can't remember for how long, but and oftentimes mentoring 2 and 3 folks at a time. Really enjoy it. It keeps me current in the field, but it also keeps me honest. I think sometimes what happens is that when we are doing this work, we tend to forget. We just become a bit robotic, right? So it's part of my value is to give back. I'm the executive director with the Diversity, Equity, and Engagement branch of the OSD, which is Opportunities and Social Development. Glad to be here today.
Thank you so much. We're going to get started here, and I'm going to run through some opening, welcoming, and framing, and then some content, but we'll also have time for small group discussions, or maybe in a large group if we have this number of people right now. I do want to begin with a land acknowledgement, and I encourage you folks to join me in this land acknowledgement. And before I get going, I'll put some links in the chat here. Bear with me as I get grounded my devices. But yeah, I would love to know where you are calling in from. So you can use your name, your pronouns, the land you're calling in from using placenames.mapdev.ca, what motivated you to attend today, and anything else you'd like to share. And as we begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Guwagage, which is the Mi'kmaq name for Big Pine Hill or Citadel Hill here in Halifax, part of Chipuktuk, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. The inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. Canada later reaffirmed the treaties in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, and they remain active to this day. So as we do in a land acknowledgement, it's more than just saying the words and acknowledging the land, but also really considering the ways that settler colonialism and white supremacy construct how we think about things and how we engage and relate to things in the world, and along with that, mentorship and leadership. So I'd love to know where you folks are calling in from. I'm assuming most of you folks are in Nova Scotia or the context of Nova Scotia within the broader context of Mi'kma'ki. I'd love to see some chat contributions. As we consider the land as well, it's also helpful to consider the ways we are also expressions of nature. So on the right, you see a cross-section of a tree stump and also a fingerprint. And it's meant to draw to mind that we are nature. We're not here to dominate or exploit or extract nature. We are a part of many different complex systems. And perhaps if we consider the ways that we are also nature, we can also think about ways that we can decolonize our practices, our worldviews, and support Indigenous resistance and resurgence here and around the world. This quote on the bottom from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Future says, "Understand that the earth is not an extension of our bodies, it's the other way around." So as we consider the land acknowledgement and ground ourselves into the space, let's take a moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. So thinking of land defenders and water protectors engaged in resistance and resurgence here in Mi'kma'ki, across Turtle Island, around the world, let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent way colonization fills our world and fills us. And let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. So hopefully this session today can help us be in right relationship with this land and with one another. I see folks checking in the chat there. I really appreciate it. And a reminder as well, we are all treaty people. And so I'm a settler Canadian of white ancestry, predominantly from the UK and Ireland and United Kingdom. And I think a lot about what is my accountability to treaty rights? What is my accountability to my Indigenous and Mi'kmaq peers and colleagues? And how does it guide the work that I'm doing here at the College of Social Workers? And so I encourage you folks to also think about this. And of course, here at the college, we're committed to striving for the calls to action and Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report and calls to action. So as we engage in learning, we're also committed to this idea of unlearning. So deconstructing, unpacking, and reconstructing our understanding of social work practice and ethics and values. Separate and distinct from our land acknowledgement is also our commitment to reparations for people of African descent. So here at the college, we see it not just as a moral obligation, but a material one. So oftentimes as we talk about social justice and equity and inclusion, we can think about, sort of the moral center or the ways of knowing and being, but we kind of lose some of that material commitment. And so for us, reparations look like restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and then guarantees of non-repetition. So here at the college, we try to take the words and thoughts of social justice, but also put them towards practice and changes in policies and our work that we do in the ways that we relate to each other. So when we're thinking about reparations of people of African descent, we're really considering the history of people of African descent here in the province. So we're thinking about the Black Loyalists, Maroons, Southern American Black refugees, and how the legacies of these communities have indelibly shaped Nova Scotia's cultural landscape. If you're curious about our commitment to reparations, you can read our commitment statement from 2024. If you click on the presentation link in the chat, it can take you to this, and all the links in here are hyperlinks, so you can click on them and engage with them on your own time. So today we're going to be talking a little bit with the Candidacy Mentorship Program, the value and power of mentoring, what mentorship can look like. And we want to really highlight that mentorship is not just about the Candidacy Mentorship Program, it's also about how we support others in this world. I wouldn't say that Winnie has been a direct mentor of mine, but I've actually believed that she's mentored me in lots of ways, and I've learned lots of lessons from my time with her. And I know that many people on this call probably have people in your life that you've worked with over time that have offered you insights and wisdom and lessons that you carry with you forward into your practice today. So we're holding on to the Candidacy Mentorship Program in this session, but also mentorship overall. We'll have some small group discussions, maybe some large group sharebacks, and then we'll do a checkout and closing. We should be together today for about an hour, so till 1 p.m. So we're hoping that we're going to, build some knowledge, some skills, shift some values, and also give you an opportunity to relate with other social workers here today. And so those are our objectives for the session. For those of us who are social workers, and I believe everyone is on this call are, reminder that this is considered formal professional development. So as you're doing your annual renewal with the college, please do include this for 1 hour formal PD. If you decide to take in the lessons from today into mentorship, you can consider this informal professional development as well. Of course, our code of ethics guides us towards this work today, and we're really looking at value 7, which in our current or our upcoming code of ethics, which has been adopted in April 2025, which will be, I guess, integrated for all social workers in this province for the upcoming year. It's really value 7, providing culturally responsive, competent professional services. So that social workers are committed to ongoing development, and they're also contributing to the ongoing development of other social workers and the social work profession at large. So some additional framing for our time together. I offer this just as a way to challenge consumer mindset. Sometimes we come to sessions like this and have some expectations for what we're going to, receive or experience, and we may meet those objectives and we may not. And it's sort of an experiment always. But the first one is your engagement with this session may not have any immediate and/or practical applications for you, and that is okay. So some people might get tangible takeaways right away today. Some folks might need a bit more time to process, or maybe this doesn't meet with your expectation. That's okay. You don't have to agree with anything presented or shared, but we ask you to be open to seeing what happens. So inviting some curiosity, knowing that we have many diverse perspectives here today. Take responsibility for yourself by observing and learning from your conscious and unconscious responses. It's up to you to decide how much you want to share and participate. Some of you might be coming with your lunch, or maybe feeling like you're going to be more passive today. That's okay. And for others, maybe you want to contribute more. That's also okay. And then finally, as reminders, we can all engage in ways that support others. So this isn't a therapeutic space. It's not a place for healing, but healing can happen here. So we're joined by Winnie Grant and Tiffany Taylor, as I already said, and thank you so much for introducing yourselves earlier. I jumped ahead a little bit by asking you to do it earlier, but I'm going to keep moving. So we're going to jump into the content today, and what I've invited Tiffany and Winnie to do is like there's some specific parts where I've thought that they could contribute from their perspectives as a candidate and a mentor, but also encourage both of them to interrupt me at any time if you feel like you have something to say. So first off, when we're thinking about the Candidacy Mentorship Program, we at the college have a secondary assessment. The primary assessment is when people apply to the college to be a member in the first place, and that's done by the Board of Examiners and the staff here. The secondary assessment is ensuring that the social workers that we're working with, new or returning, are competent in their practice. In many places, this is often an exam. For here, we've decided to do something a little bit different. And so in the Social Workers Act, it says social worker candidates mean a person registered pursuant to this act to practice social work in the province as a candidate. So it's anyone who's registered, who has a doctoral, master's, or bachelor's degree of social work from an approved institution, and they're either new or returning social workers, or social workers who are coming to this province from another jurisdiction who haven't done candidacy or need more practice experience. For candidates, they have the same rights and privileges as a registered social worker with the addition of mentoring. And so the title that they can use is Social Worker Candidate, or SWC, where people who've completed the program can be RSW Clinical Specialist if they've gone and done supervision or have private practice, or an associate member. Ultimately, it's the Board of Examiners who determine who must be a SWC based on legislation, regulations, and bylaws. If you're not familiar with those, you can click on this presentation and they're linked in here as well. So one of the things I often hear from people, especially if they're, returning to practice or coming from another jurisdiction where exams are the norm, is why the mentorship program and not an exam? Exams have a place and purpose for assessment, but what we also know through research and evidence is that standardized exams actually have quite a racist beginning and have racist and oppressive elements to them today in practice. And so people who are marginalized or face barriers or oppression are disproportionately impacted by the negative outcomes of standardized assessments and testing. And so we have no belief that the Candidacy Mentorship Program is perfect or that it meets everyone's needs. We do believe and are very committed to this program because we understand and we hear from folks that it's more supportive and relational and flexible rather than a standardized exam. So it exists to offer support and guidance to new and returning social workers without the use of oppressive standardized testing methods. And so there's some links in here from the National Association of Social Workers in the States, Rosalie's and Walker and Soares, who talk a little bit more about what are some of the racist and white supremacist underpinnings of standardized testing. And our purpose of the CMP, or the Candidacy Mentorship Program, is that it's strategic, supportive. It offers educational development experience rooted in principles of adult learning. So think about the formal and the informal and the experiential. Links new and returning social workers with established social workers. Offers mentorship of 32 hours over 2,500 hours of practice experience. People get to develop their own learning goals based on the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. And ultimately, our hope and our belief and what the evidence is telling us is that it helps social workers strive for safer social work practice. Some of the guiding principles of our program are that it's grounded in the values and ethics and principles of the social work professions. That's guided by the Canadian Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice, but also our own. It's the ones we have recently adapted. It supports knowledge, skill, and value building. It's a supportive environment for exploration of complex ethical issues, and it builds a commitment to lifelong learning. Strengths-based, adaptive, and flexible, builds an understanding of the professional social work identity and complexity of practice, advances the uniqueness of social work voice and the role it plays in social justice and systemic change, and that it's regular, consistent, and structured. So there's a bit of a paradox there. It's both flexible and adaptive, but also regular, consistent, and structured. And so some of the boundaries or limits of the candidacy program, I'm thinking of like the 2,500 hours, the 32 hours of mentorship, that's structured. We're also working currently to add a few additional elements of education and support for candidates that will be more consistent and structured, while also still allowing people to develop their own learning goals. Most candidates complete the program within 2 years. The fastest you can do it, I believe, is 16 months, but you have up to 5 years. And so when we think about compliance and people who are currently in the program, as long as they're engaged in the program in some way throughout 5 years, they are compliant. Some people take longer than 5 years, and that's okay, but ideally it's done within 5 years. And when they finish the CMP, they should be able to demonstrate an understanding and application of the Code of Ethics and SOP, or Standards of Practice. And that doesn't mean they have to be able to recite every single standard, principle, value, but they should have developed a deeper awareness of the ones specifically targeted towards their learning goals. And then ultimately integrate the content and spirit of both documents so that they can apply them in their day-to-day social work practice. So mentors, who are they? For our program, it's registered social workers who have completed the Candidacy Mentorship Program and or have at least 2 years of practice experience. Ideally, they're within the province and they're members of the college, and at times there is allowance for people from outside of the college, outside of our jurisdiction to be mentors. So for instance, if someone moves to another province and they're only a couple months away from finishing, we have some flexibility there. It's important that the mentors are not the workplace supervisor. I often experience with my candidates, and when I was a candidate, that many of my discussions were around ethical considerations or concerns with the agency and the context I was practicing in. And for many people, that's a lot easier when you're doing these with someone who you don't work directly with. It can happen at times that the direct work supervisor or someone who has power or leadership over the candidate is their mentor, but it's not advised. The mentors are approved by the associate registrar or the registrar. They're also able to track up to 12 hours of mentoring per year as their professional development. And that mentors are also available, consistent, and supportive. So what makes for a good mentor? I have some thoughts here that I want to share, but I also want to invite Tiffany and Winnie to speak to this as well. But some of the things that we think that make a good mentor is that you have effective communication skills and you practice active listening. You have respect, unconditional positive regard for your candidate, for instance. You have a patience and a warm and positive attitude. You believe in the potential of others, and you demonstrate the willingness to take risks. That doesn't mean that mentors have to be positive all the time or unlimited in the support they offer. Sometimes support looks like providing direct feedback and being critical. But we do believe that this does help for mentorship. We believe that mentors model excellence in professional practice, so demonstrating a commitment to upholding equitable and ethical practices, also demonstrating critical thinking and analysis, having conflict resolution skills, and situational leadership. So knowing that, top-down hierarchical leadership has a place, but it's not the only option for leadership. So being adaptive and flexible in your leadership styles. Believe that mentors should be able to foster an effective mentor-candidate relationship. So trust and confidentiality, having relational accountability, being approachable and welcoming, supporting, encouraging, providing critical reflection and feedback, being open to sharing your experience and wisdom, collaborative, celebrating achievements, and ultimately allowing candidates to make their own decisions. So mentorship in our program, and I believe mentorship as a way of working with others in community, is not about being directive. It's about supporting people to come to their own conclusions and driving their own bus, if that makes sense. One second. Another thing that helps make a good mentor is fostering growth. So applying a coaching approach to the relationship you have with the candidate, encouraging candidates to identify their own strengths, gaps, and growth potential, helping people set realistic goals, and then modeling reflective and reflexive practice. I often hear from candidates like, well, how many goals should I have? And there's no strict rules on how many goals you should have. I've seen candidates with 10 goals, and I've seen candidates with 2. I always recommend at least 3, but throughout the process, you can also adapt and refine your goals or delete some of them if you'd like to. I'm gonna step back here for a second. Oh, what makes a good mentor? These are 2 quotes from Winnie, so I'm not going to speak on your behalf, Winnie, but I would love to hear from Tiffany and Winnie around what makes a good mentor from your perspective.
I don't know, should I go first or?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tiffany.
Yeah, I was just trying to get myself off of mute, but you go ahead if you choose.
Yeah, it's really, well, first I'll say Winnie is an amazing mentor, and there's just so many aspects as to why she is such a good mentor. But I think I really enjoy, and you already mentioned this, Tyler, is that like that critical reflection and kind of making me think more about like how I can approach a different situation, and maybe not all about just looking at things differently. So also kind of calling me out, and not calling me out in a bad way, but as in like looking at things in a different way. And also too, I really enjoy Winnie's flexibility, especially in the work that I'm doing right now. It's every day looks so different, and there's lots of things that come up, and I really need that guidance and mentorship. And Winnie is always there. I'll send a text. I never feel like I'm bothering her because she never makes me feel that way, even outside of times we may schedule. Whether that's a quick phone call in the morning or in the evening, or setting up a meeting that can take place sooner rather than later. I really enjoy that flexibility, and also just like the guidance and the knowledge that she has, specifically with Winnie being in this field before. I think that's so important, that when I do have situations, chances are Winnie has been through them before, and she has such knowledge and guidance that she can offer that can really support me in how I move forward in my own practice. Yeah, I could go on forever. I don't want to take up too much time, but there's like so many things. I really, really think it's a privilege to have Winnie as a mentor. And I really appreciate that all the time.
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate that. And just for folks, this was not set up that way. I feel humbled to be able to provide this knowledge and to share this knowledge. And I think one of the things that, I mean, Tyler, you have listed all of the really critical components around mentorship, around being flexible, meeting people where they're at, being transparent, being able to establish a relationship that's open and honest. And sometimes if I don't know stuff, then let's find this out together, because I don't ever want anyone to think that I have all the answers. But let's tease it out. Let's critically reflect. Let's reframe it. Let's look at what's going on in our lives that might have us interpret it in a certain way, right? I think really when we're looking at coaching and being able to model what's happening, and I think that in this particular case, but in most cases as a social worker, a lot of depending on where you're working, but a lot of the discussions that come back could very well be around how do I do the work that I'm doing as one aspect of it, but also how do I stay true to my own personal values, and do they align with the values of like the code of ethics and the organization, and really helping folks to understand their purpose, to be grounded in that level of purpose in terms of why they're doing the work. But also I think lifting, we do such hard work, and sometimes it's very non-thankful work. And so how do we show folks that they're being seen, that they're being heard, and the value that they bring to their team, but also the value that they bring to communities, right? And the people that they serve. And when we do this work, we don't do it for a tap on the back, or for a thank you, but sometimes when we're really deep in the trenches and we're having not just a bad day at work, but we're having a bad day in life, how do we find ourselves, to define the balance and take the time that we need, right? And I think those are the lessons that I learned in the field, that if I'm not healthy, I'm not going to be able to help others, right? And to recognize too that everybody at some point will feel these ways, but let's not stay there. How do we, we acknowledge it, we recognize it, and then we find ways to help get through it. So in addition to the things that you have put there, I think, being critical, and, critical doesn't mean negative, right? It's just really helping to broaden the horizon, to think outside the box in terms of like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I seeing it in the manner that I'm seeing it? And it could be influenced by something else as well, right? So, yeah.
Could I add one more thing?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say something off of what you just said, Winnie, is that personal piece, because Winnie always asks me how I'm doing. too, right? It's not just specifically about my social work practice, because how we practice really comes out in how we're doing ourselves as well. So I always really do appreciate that. It's always checking in with me as well. And I feel very confident in sharing with her things that are going on in my personal life, because that can show up in your social work practice if you're not taking care of yourself, right? So I do appreciate that as well.
That's a really important piece, Tiffany. And I think that's how I try to show up in my mentoring. And that's how I was mentored, and that we're humans and life has never been more complex. And we're seeing the rise of authoritarianism, fascism, and like the deepening and entrenchment of like oppressive factors all throughout society. And so we're impacted by that. That shows up in how we relate to the world and our jobs and our lives. And so I know in my own mentoring, we spend a lot of time laughing and talking about what's going on in our lives, while also getting deep into ethical conversations. And there's a bit of a framework that I'll share for how mentoring meetings can look like through our program or just in community. But yeah, we're humans first before anything else. And so we have to engage in that way, in a relational, accountability way. So thank you for sharing, both of you. Want to talk a little bit more about the power and value of mentorship and some of the things that I've found online. And these are some links that you can click on and look through. I think one's from Forbes, another one's from Indeed, so just accessible links online. But mentorship exists outside of the Candidacy Mentorship Program. We have some boundaries and constraints on our program as a regulated profession. But mentorship as a way of engaging in community and working with people can look like lots of different things. So it can be traditional one-on-one mentorship. You can do reverse mentoring where maybe the person who's younger, who has less experience, is mentoring the other person. There's group mentorship. That's what I'm engaged in currently with the mentorship program. You can do virtual, you can do peer-to-peer, there's sponsorship, and then there's onboarding and work. I often think that it's a missed opportunity when you start a new job if you don't have a mentor and you don't approach it with a mentorship mindset, because work is complex and hard and you're always having to learn. And so having that as part of the onboarding process can be fundamentally empowering for everyone involved. But most of all, it can be relational and easy. Not to say that it isn't sometimes hard and challenging, but I just want to contribute to the myth busting of mentorship. It doesn't have to be complicated all the time. It can be relational. It can be as simple as having a conversation. Mentors can provide guidance and wisdom, encourage resilience and adaptability, and cultivate ethical leadership. That's outside of our program and inside our program. It can also support growth in the source of knowledge, in sourcing of knowledge. It can help mentees make connections. It can help people have an ally, offer constructive feedback, and then give back through sharing experiences. I know in my mentoring, there are so many frameworks and things that have been gifted to me by people way wiser than I am that show up in my life today. So I have a framework around adult education that I just shared the other day that someone gifted to me 20 years ago. And so who we are and the things that go in our toolbox can come into our mentoring. So what are some of the benefits of being a mentor? So some of the things that you can experience as a mentor within our program or just out in the community, you get to build your relational skills. You can strengthen your knowledge. It's also a learning opportunity. I learn from the candidates all the time. I learn from people that I mentor out in the community. I often try to mentor and work with young queer folks because I'm part of the queer community. Expand your networks. You can receive recognition. So as Winnie said earlier, it's like it can feel good and you can have that reflected back to you sometimes in the people that you're working with. And there are moments that I've cried and been surprised by some of the warm things people have said to me. So it feels good in this profession where we often don't get enough recognition. You can establish your own leadership skills, add to your qualifications. So from a career development point of view, it can look good on a resume or LinkedIn. Build confidence, gain new perspectives, have a sense of fulfillment, and also practice your own self-reflection. There are days when I get to my mentoring and I go, what am I prepared for today? Did I prepare enough? And I'm consistently reminded that sometimes you don't have to prepare at all. Sometimes you just have to be present. I'm wondering, Winnie, if you have any thoughts on what you'd like to share around, like, what are the benefits to you?
Sure, I was going to jump in until you flip to another page and take all of my other ideas like you did the last time. So, um, one of the things with mentoring, most of the folks that I mentor are racialized. And, sometimes it's extremely difficult to either begin a position, but when you're, maybe only one person who's racialized on the team, it's about how do we get through some of the difficult times, right? And not only just from peers, but from the families that you're serving, right? And so there's a whole cultural peer support that happens around, and again, it's that recognizing that you're not alone. And even as a professional, you don't feel you should be experiencing these things, but you are experiencing it. And the impact that it has on your psychological development. So wellness, I think, is another key piece. The other that I think that's really important, when you establish this relationship, it allows you to accept feedback in a way that you may not be able to accept it if someone is not telling you this. So for example, and this is not Tiffany, because Tiffany is very reflective and very critical, takes responsibility for what she does, what she knows. So it's fairly easy in that sense. But there have been times when folks would receive feedback from their supervisor, and I would be able to help them to understand why that feedback is being received based on some of the things that I've witnessed as well. So, and then we work towards how do we shift it? How do we shift that perspective? And so I think that part of the value is that you get to hear it from someone you trust once you've established that trusting relationship, which then shifts the mindset when you're showing up at work. Because I think what Tiffany shared is that sometimes we don't realize how external factors might be impacting how we show up at work. And supervisors, most times, if you're getting levels of feedback, or even your peers, may not know what's going on in your world. And so having that conversation helps us to be cognizant of how that is showing up, not just in work, but also how work might be showing up at home, right? The strain from the levels of work that you're doing. So those are some of the values and power of mentorship that I'll share.
Thanks, Winnie. And for other folks on the call right now, I know we don't have access to the mic or the cameras just yet, but if there's other things coming to your mind about what are the benefits of being a mentor, put them in the chat. I'd love to see some thoughts from other folks. I know there's some mentors on the call. Tiffany, is there any other thoughts on your end about what you would see as being the benefit of being a mentor?
Benefit of being a mentor, like when I think about Winnie's mentorship and just what she mentioned about mentoring racialized candidates, that was really important for me, because not only is Winnie a mentor in my social work practice, she's also a mentor for me in community, and just seeing how she's been able to overcome and the resilience within her, and how she's continued to succeed throughout her career. I think that's very important that she can share that insight with me, because there's times where you just want to give up, right? And then to have somebody like Winnie who's been through it and has all that knowledge and guidance and can support you during those moments, those weak moments, we all have them. That's very important to me. So like Winnie's a mentor for me in many different aspects of my life, not just the candidacy program. So I think that's really important to have certain connections like that, like we shared certain lived experiences with our cultural backgrounds and things like that, so we can connect on a different level based on those experiences. And I think that just enriches our relationship so much more in that mentorship.
Thank you for
Tyler,
adding that. Oh, Winnie.
can I
Yeah, go ahead.
also add that there are times when, there's formal, like you said, and informal mentorship. And, one of the pieces that I always, people, and you've shared this, people have poured into me, and I have an obligation to pour into others. So I think, that's the other power of mentorship, with the expectation that they're going to pour into somebody else, right? And so, but again, we have to go back and model that, and we even have to speak it, because sometimes we get caught up in so much of the work that we do. We can't be all things to all people, but we do have an obligation as, community. I think about the philosophy of Ubuntu, and how, we are who we are because of the society and the networks that we have. And so the value of pouring into others and being able to assist, even in the smallest way, sometimes we never realize how we have impacted people. And so I think that's the other, power, is being able to pass it forward.
Yeah. And I think maybe in a better world, a more socially just and harmonious world, mentorship would just be embedded to how we relate to things and to each other. And with the forces of white supremacy, settler colonialism, capitalism, I wonder how that disconnects us from this obligation and this accountability we have to each other and community, and allows us to feel like we don't have capacity. So if you're on the call and you're thinking, I'd like to be a mentor, consider it. It's maybe easier than you think, and maybe we're more rewarding. I'm like the king of, like, if it goes in my calendar, I'm like, oh no, woe is me. And then I forget how lovely a lot of the things I get to do are. So I wanted to share, before we get into discussion, what can a mentorship meeting look like? And this is directly what my mentorship meetings look like. And I'd love to know from Winnie and Tiffany in a second what their meetings look like. But I do a 2-hour meeting once a week, or once a month, pardon me, with my 2 candidates that I currently have. And this is generally the framework that we use every single time. They're aware of this framework. This is what they expect when they come to the meetings. But we usually spend a good 30 minutes doing a relational check-in. So exploring questions like, how have you been since we last met? What is on your heart, mind, and spirit as we begin this meeting? Anything you are looking forward to discussing today? And so for some candidates and people, life happens, death, trauma, celebrations, excitements, children, connections and community, marriage sometimes, right? And so you want to make sure that we have space for that whole human approach. And it doesn't have to be like 30 minutes on the dot at the beginning. The expectation for our program is that you're meeting for 2 hours a month, and we understand that you're human and that you're going to have lots of different discussions, and that it's through the practice of reflection and applying that reflexive lens that we deepen our understanding of our learning goals around the code of ethics and standards of practice. I often ask, for a summary of the time since we last met. So what stands out as an impactful moment or moments at your place of employment since we last met? I encourage candidates to come with that to the meeting with a reflection on, like, what's something that stands out from that previous month. And sometimes they don't have capacity or time, and so we think about it on the spot. But usually like to unpack and debrief something that's happened at work and see how it connects to the code of ethics and their learning goals. Then we go to a little bit deeper. How do these moments relate to your learning goals? So trying to go down a level into a little bit of a deeper analysis and see what are the connections or maybe disconnections that come with the experiences they've had, and how are they carrying this forward into their next, or into their practice, or into their theoretical framework. We also spend time setting the date for the next meeting. So for my candidates that I currently work with, we have to be a bit adaptive and flexible. And I know Tiffany and Winnie, you've talked about this earlier, that like sometimes the meetings happen last minute or as they come up, and I've done that as well. I try not to be too strict around the meeting times. I'm also very privileged to work at the college where I can make this part of my job. So it happens during the daytime. For some mentors and candidates, it happens in the evenings, on the weekends, over a phone call. It can be different for everyone. And then I always like to tie up the meeting with a bit of a relational checkout with questions like, what are you taking away from this conversation? What are you looking forward to right now? And that's sometimes related to the code of ethics and their practice. And sometimes it's they're going on vacation, or they got a new puppy, or they're going to have some ice cream that day. So creating space for people to share whatever feels right for them. Often try to include a 5 to 10 minute break, which is helpful for me, not just the candidates. Also invite the candidates to come with things that they want to talk about that maybe are their own frameworks or things that they've learned through their own professional development to talk about in the sessions. I often really want to champion group mentorship if people are considering that on this call. Within our program, you're allowed to mentor up to 3 people at a time, I believe, and you can do them together. And I've actually found that group mentoring has enriched this experience for me, and I hear from the candidates it enriches the experience for them. Tiffany or Winnie, what are some reflections on your end for what your mentorship meetings look like?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we do in our mentorship meetings too. Well, quite similar, like especially those relational check-ins. That's always a part of those meetings. And we have those meetings that we'll schedule, and they can be focused around the goals that I would have created, and, things I can do to, move towards those goals in my practice and things like that, which is really beneficial for me. What I really like about the mentorship meetings and what they can look like is, like, Winnie is very flexible, and I really enjoy that. For example, Winnie really likes to walk. So sometimes there's a time we went for a walk and talked and, did the meeting that way, sometimes over the phone, in person, especially with this work, it can be really challenging. And takes up a lot of time. So I really appreciate that those meetings can be very flexible and look different. Also too, we are focused around, what are my goals and how am I working towards those? But sometimes because the job can be so challenging and it does affect my practice, that they can be like impromptu and where they just are, sorry, I apologize, Winnie, but I feel like sometimes you might be my therapist as well. But sometimes they can be dedicated to that because that's also a very important part of this process too. So that's what I'm probably missing some things, but that's what I like to add.
Yeah, and I would say that, there is a summary, there is like what I'd like to do. And even in the beginning, when folks ask me to be their mentor, I will say to them, so this is my expectation. So I lay out those expectations right in the very beginning in terms of this is your responsibility to do X, Y, and Z. Recognizing that there are times that we're not going to be able to meet because of the work or things change. And so that level of flexibility. And, I will preach self-care because that is so critically important. And so part of that day when we went for a walk, we also, you forgot to say that we had a big meal at Meza. So we needed to walk it off and talk as well. So, I mean, I think having it unstructured and structured, but meeting the same goals and talking about the same things and having folks come with a particular case with non-identifying information so that they can demonstrate how that is part of the code of ethics and their goals that they're setting as well. And to be able to challenge and say, so, and not necessarily in Tiffany's case, but there's one candidate that I have where we're talking about professionalism. And so I can say, so how was that professional? How did you, how were you least intrusive? How did you listen to the family? How did you put an Afrocentric approach to that practice when you were doing that? So, being able to listen to what folks are saying, but also have them repeat back so that they can sort of have an understanding themselves and again, challenge in a respectful way of being able to hear themselves in terms of what they're thinking. I'll also do a summary and say, what is your takeaway? What do you want to work on during the time that we're not together? And then as we start in the beginning again. So this was the summary of last time. So how did that work for you? Where are the challenges? Were those tips helpful? And if they were, great. And if they were not, let's figure out what other barrier might have been in play. So those are some of the things.
Thank you to both for sharing. We're going to move into some sense making and discussion. So I just want to say thank you to Tiffany and Winnie for sharing your perspectives on the previous slides and your experiences of being a candidate and a mentor. And I'm going to stop recording for the rest of the call so that we can feel hopefully more empowered to speak and not know that our words won't go, forever on record in YouTube. But just want to say before we end the recording again, thank you to Tiffany and Winnie for being here, and they'll stay for the discussions as well. But I'll stop recording right now.